Joining me once again on the show, Jason B. Hirschhorn, who has a bunch of different jobs, but covers the football for SB Nation and also has a Packers Substack called The Leap. Hey, good to see you again. Thanks for being with me.
Thanks for having me back.
All right, so let's get into this game. This is arguably the headliner for Week 3. You've got the Packers visiting Tampa in their home opener, and now we know that Mike Evans is not going to be available for Tampa, so their receiving core further depleted. How does that ultimately affect what Green Bay is going to be able to do?
Well, you do have to start with that offensive personnel around Tom Brady. Mike Evans, as you mentioned, is not going to play in this game. His one-game suspension has been upheld. They also may be without Chris Godwin. That is still unclear at this time, but he missed all of last week with practice and played in Week 2. We'll have to see if he's able to get right for Week 3. And it's along the offensive line, too. Donovan Smith has missed time, their starting left tackle. Josh Wells, the man who was charged with replacing him, is on IR now. So they could be down to their number 3 left tackle. This is an offensive line that's already dealt with injuries elsewhere. So, yeah, Tom Brady can do a lot, and they still have some weapons in that offense. Julio Jones now chief among them. But it is a very different cast of characters for Tom Brady, and that is materially going to affect the way the Packers approach them. When you have all of those weapons around Tom Brady, you're going to play a lot more too high coverages, a lot more conservative when it comes to that fewer man. If it's just Julio Jones and a bunch of players with limited experience, that might be a different way the Packers can approach them. They may be able to throw more of their resources toward the run, which has been a problem for them so far this season. Maybe they'll throw more of their resources towards confusing Tom Brady, perhaps, with simulated pressure and some other things that the Packers have been known to do. So it is going to change the way Joe Barry, the defensive coordinator, approaches this week if indeed almost all of those players that are currently injured or suspended are not available.
You would have to think that Tom Brady would be uncomfortable already heading into a matchup without his guys, his go-to guys like a Mike Evans or like a Godwin if he's not available. How important is the Packers pass rush going to be in this contest with what they're able to do, making Tom Brady uncomfortable? I mean, could that be one of the X factors when you assess this matchup?
It's an X factor for them every single week. The way the Packers have generally approached things under Joe Barry is not to blitz a lot and instead rely on those key players along the defensive front to get pressure by themselves without additional pass rushers and make things more difficult for the quarterback. That doesn't matter if they're playing a young quarterback. It doesn't matter if they're playing the most experienced quarterback in the NFL today, Tom Brady. So they're going to depend on Rashawn Gary, Kenny Clark, Preston Smith, those guys and more along the defensive front to generate pressure and allow more of those defenders to drop back into coverage, because the picture becomes a lot more complicated when a quarterback is looking and 8 of those defenders are back there as opposed to trying to chase him in the backfield. So if Tom Brady is already dealing with a depleted offensive line, as it appears that he will be, and the Packers don't have to blitz with any regularity and they're able to get home to him, obviously it's going to be a huge advantage for the Packers. If, however, Brady, who is so expert in that quick game, is able to mitigate that to some degree with those quick passes, the Packers are going to have some ways to adjust to that. That said, it is going to be up to Tom Brady in all likelihood to really mitigate that Packers pass rush, those offensive line woes that the Tampa Bay Buccaneers are dealing with, because there just aren't a lot of guys left in reserve there.
Any reason to think that this isn't a matchup in the trenches that the Packers couldn't exploit? I mean, in theory, if the defensive front executes and does, what you're saying they can do, that'll make life really difficult for Tom Brady on Sunday. I mean, do you fully expect that to be the case?
Yeah, I think the Packers are going to approach it as though they don't have to blitz a lot until proven otherwise, because they are a zone-based defense. This is something that the coaching staff has reiterated ever since week 1 when they got blown up by Justin Jefferson. This is the way they approach defensive football. And there's pros and cons to every approach. But for the Packers, it gives them the ability, if they're able to get to the quarterback without blitzing, to have more of those defenders not just drop back in coverage, but to keeping their eyes on the quarterback. That's going to limit the amount of opportunities that quarterback has. It's also going to create opportunities for turnovers. This is something that the Packers have done very well the last few years. At the end of week 2, that game against the Chicago Bears in primetime, that game was really ended to the degree that it was still going at the time when Jair Alexander was able to pick off Bears second-year quarterback Justin Fields. So those zone coverages provide more opportunities for those turnovers, again, if the pass rush is getting home. So yeah, if the Packers are winning in the trenches, it is going to provide so many multiplying effects for that defense.
The other big question mark in terms of availability is on the Packers side with David Bakhtiari. What do we know, or what do we think we know about his potential availability at this point?
Well, we certainly don't know that he's coming back. Matt LaFleur, the Packers head coach, was asked on Wednesday whether Bakhtiari would play, and he gave basically the same answers he's been giving this entire time. We don't know. We'll see. Depends on how practice goes. Depends on how his body responds, which, of course, sure, that's what the coach is going to say. But they have been trending towards Bakhtiari playing within the first 4 weeks of the season. That's why they activated him, among other reasons, off of the PUP list during the preseason. Now, he hasn't put together a full practice yet, but he's been making strides in that department. Elgton Jenkins, their other offensive lineman who's returning from an ACL, put his first full practice in Friday of last week, played in week 2. So Bakhtiari is able to put in a full practice and he doesn't have any setbacks. I think it's a very strong indication that he's going to play this Sunday against Tampa Bay. And if that happens, it's not just what that provides Aaron Rodgers in terms of pass protection, although that's a big part of it. It's also going to help in the run game. That's such a big part of what the Packers do now, especially without Davante Adams being there. They've added all of these different wrinkles that, they featured at times in previous years under Matt LaFleur, but they didn't really focus on in terms of being the core of that run game. They're doing pinball stuff. They're doing all of these different things that they haven't shown much before and have been really effective with it because of how good Aaron Jones is, because how good A.J. Dillon is, and how good that offensive line can be when it's fully healthy. Bakhtiari obviously would play a huge role in that if he's back in the lineup.
I was going to ask you about the run game and how big of a priority that's going to be on Sunday against Tampa. But because you kind of checked that off the list, I mean, let's just spend a minute on sort of their new offensive identity here without Davante Adams and their own receiving core. I mean, you, I think, took a deep dive on the Leap in the Packers Substack that you have. I saw on your Twitter feed that, the team would maybe be interested in adding another piece. How do they continue to address the core issue that they have with the receiving core and maybe trying to make up a little bit in the passing game for what Davante Adams' void has been?
Yeah, this is really a different receiving core that Aaron Rodgers has had in almost any year with the Green Bay Packers, except for maybe 2015. And that, of course, was a year when their number one receiver tore his ACL in the preseason. The number 2, a much younger Randall Cobb, had a series of injuries during the preseason and during the season that limited him. And while they had Davante Adams, he was in his second season. He wasn't the all-pro receiver we now know. And he, too, was dealing with injury. So this is a very different set of personnel that Rodgers is working with. Now, they like a lot of those guys. Allen Lazard, Sammy Watkins, Randall Cobb can all play roles for that offense, but none of them can be, lead receivers in the traditional sense. And it's going to force the Packers to change. We've already seen that again with the additional focus, not just on the run game, but different ways they're going to deploy those running backs. Aaron Jones has always been a factor in the passing game for Green Bay, but it's going to be more pronounced this season. Same thing with A.J. Dillon. Now, in terms of what the Packers are going to do with the receiving core over the course of the season, they're going to wait and see what those rookies are able to do. They drafted Christian Watson in the second round, traded up to get him. And then they drafted Romeo Doubs in the fourth round. Both of those players could hold the key to unlocking that passing game later in the season. They're just not there right now. The Packers are going to give them opportunities to show that they're able to grow into those roles. But if that doesn't happen in the context of 2022, they are going to look at veteran options that may be available on the free agent market and on the trade market. I reported for The Leap that this offseason, they got into very serious talks with the New York Jets about Corey Davis, a player with which Matt LaFleur has experience. They were overlapping in Tennessee there in 2018. Also has connections because Robert Saleh, the Jets head coach, is LaFleur's best friend in the industry. And Mike LaFleur is the offensive coordinator there. That, of course, is Matt's younger brother. So a lot of connective tissue there. And they like what Corey Davis type of receiver can do for that offense. Not just going to limit it to guys that they have connections with. Odell Beckham, still a free agent, still unsigned, still recovering from the torn ACL that he suffered in the Super Bowl. That's someone that they're going to look at. They looked at him last year. They made a very serious push for him. Ultimately, obviously, he signed with the Rams. But that remains a point of fascination for them if the receiving core is giving them trouble down the line. You can have games in which you don't need them to really win it for you the way that Davante Adams obviously did for so many years in Green Bay. But that's just not a script that you can run all the way through the season and expect it to work every single week. So they're going to keep their eyes open. They're going to pursue other options. I mean, that's always been the mentality of this front office, but they have to be a little more serious about it now, given the deficiencies in that receiving core. And if those rookies don't step up, and especially if that quarterback, which we know how cranky he can be about the personnel around him, if he looks at this group before the November 1st trade deadline and says, we need to add someone, I do think the Packers can be very proactive, whether that's, again, through a trade or looking at one of those veterans on the free agent market.
I feel like it's a lot to ask rookies over the course of one season to step up and be able to execute in a new system at this level, the way that Aaron Rodgers might expect. I mean, I know that that's their job. I know that the NFL is a small league in so many respects, and also nobody has any patience anymore. But is your instinct, is your gut telling you that eventually they might go ahead and pursue those other paths, those veterans, bringing somebody in who can at least really get up to speed quickly and understand what Aaron Rodgers wants? And additionally to that, if Odell Beckham is somebody that is able to get healthy and potentially add value, is he going to be a point of fascination for other teams in addition to just Green Bay?
Yeah, let's start with that Beckham point first. He is already a point of fascination for multiple teams around the league. The Rams in particular have made no secret of their interest in bringing him back later in the year. It's currently anticipated that he would be available to play sometime in November or December. So that's late in the season, but that's good enough for the late stretch and especially in the playoffs. The Rams have kept a locker open for him. It's the same locker he had last year. That's not a coincidence. The Buffalo Bills also have interest in adding him. And we're going to see other teams crop up here and there when injuries happen, or teams that find themselves in more advantageous positions than they initially expected suddenly want to add another veteran receiver. So it won't just be the Packers that come knocking on his door. That said, Green Bay may be able to offer things to him that other teams right now cannot. In Green Bay, especially once he gets up to speed, he would be the featured wideout. I don't think there's any question about that. If you were to go back to the Rams, he'd be part of a group that obviously has Cooper Kupp. A lot of the targets are going to go there. Allen Robinson, a player that they invested a lot of money in this offseason, is also going to command a lot of attention in that offense. So Beckham wouldn't be exactly just a pure role player, but he would be seeing a lot less attention there than he would in other spots. Buffalo, kind of the same deal, right? Stephon Diggs, obviously an all-pro caliber player. He's going to command a lot of attention from the offense at all times when he's on the field. And Gabriel Davis, one of their young receivers, has really come into his own over the past year. He's someone that they want to give more and more opportunities to. So Beckham, again, would be playing a more secondary role there. Green Bay, as we said already, that would not be the case. He would be the featured wideout. We'll have to see how he progresses. Again, it's an ACL tear. Every player is different. That's not the first one of Beckham's career. He's an older player now. All of those things mean it's not just going to be smooth sailing automatically for him the rest of the way. But if he gets cleared, if he's healthy, and if the contenders come calling, Green Bay is going to be able to make a pretty compelling offer to him. They have over $8 million in cap space, so money shouldn't be that big of an issue either. Now, as for your other question about the rookie wideouts, I agree with you. I think it is asking a lot. Not that they couldn't step into larger roles than they're currently playing, but asking any rookie, even if it was a top 10 draft pick, to lead a passing game is a lot. We've seen this happen at times. Justin Jefferson a few years ago. Jamar Chase was such a big part of that Bengals passing game last year. But those are the exceptions. Those are not commonplace, at least not as of this time. Christian Watson is making a jump from the FCS level. And while he certainly has the physical tools and the intelligence to make a relatively quick adjustment to the NFL by receiver standards, doesn't necessarily mean he's going to be ready to be a true number one wide receiver as a rookie. Romeo Doubs coming up from Nevada, again, that's a pretty steep jump. It's asking a lot. Even if those guys are both very talented, and they've both shown at times during training camp and the preseason, at least preseason in terms of Romeo Doubs, that they can be playmakers. I think expecting them to take on larger roles is not crazy. Expecting them to lead the passing game is a whole nother thing. And if and when that doesn't happen, as we've discussed, Green Bay will have to look at veteran options because, it's a win now year, as it has been for the last few years, as it will be until Aaron Rodgers retires. They have to put everything they can into the current season, and I expect them to do so if those rookies are not able to handle more down the stretch.
When you look at this matchup, just kind of on paper, it seems like it might have the recipe for being a pretty competitive, pretty tight game. What do you ultimately think the sort of outcome will be on Sunday? Are you expecting this one to go down to the wire? Could it come to who has the last possession? What do you think?
I'm not sure about score, but I do think it's going to be a struggle for both teams. This is a very improved Green Bay Packers defense, and this is a Tampa Bay offense that, as we've discussed already, is missing so many pieces. And then on the flip side, this is a Packers offensive line that might get David Bakhtiari back, but it's his first game since that little brief appearance at the end of the 2021 season, and it will probably be his first real appearance in any meaningful way since the end of the 2020 season. That's putting a lot on him. He's a veteran, a multi-time All-Pro. He's extremely gifted, but that's a long time away to be able just to step right in and be an All-Pro again. I don't think that's a reasonable expectation for anybody. So it's an offensive line that's dealing with changes. And it's a Tampa Bay defense that, as we've seen over the years, especially under Todd Bowles, is going to be able to bring a lot of interesting pressures. That's really the calling card of all of Bowles' defenses. So it might be hard for the Packers to move the ball and for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers to move the ball. And if you get into that kind of slugfest, it's, a real rock fight, it might come down to turnovers. And so many of these games do, obviously, but this one feels like it's ripe for that kind of feel. That sort of no one can really do what they want to do. And it's who gets the advantageous hit, the advantageous bounce of the ball that ultimately emerges victorious.
Yeah, I agree with you. And, as just one kind of quick last point on Bakhtiari, in terms of public perception of him, how Packers fans feel about some of the injury stuff that he's dealt with. And you mentioned it's been a good couple years until you've really been able to kind of see him perform on a consistent basis. Do you think he gets, I don't really know how to phrase it, something of a bad rap? I mean, he's certainly been bitten by some injury stuff that hasn't helped his case, but what's kind of your take on how fans view what he's been able to provide in the last couple of seasons?
From what I've been able to tell, I think most of the fans feel some combination of empathy for him because he's just gone through all of these setbacks. He's had 3 different procedures, including the original knee reconstruction. And obviously there was a lot of expectation that he was going to be able to make a relatively quick return going into the 2021 season. That did not transpire. And while things have gone much better thus far in 2022, he didn't start week 1. It is unclear whether he's going to play in week 3. Even if that happens, it's going to be a long time coming, as we discussed. So again, I think there's a lot of empathy and sympathy for him there. And I think there's frustration, but not with Bakhtiari individually, maybe more with the team for not communicating the situation better. The team, as most are, very cryptic about their comments about injured players. That includes this week when they won't commit to him playing or not. And again, I don't think they were ever going to say David Bakhtiari is or isn't playing, but they wouldn't even reflect on the idea he might practice in full this week or not. So I think the communication from the team is something that has made a lot of fans upset. And, until Bakhtiari's back on the field, I don't think that frustration is going to totally subside.
And just lastly for you, and maybe something of a little bit of a lighter note here. I mean, this ayahuasca celebration against the Bears, you're hearing about it every single week. I'm curious, covering Green Bay as closely as you do, what do Packers fans think about the continual evolution of Aaron Rodgers and all of this sort of parts of his personality that continue to leak out? I mean, are we going to see another sort of hilarious celebration this week? Are Packers fans just unapologetically in his corner? I mean, he is such an interesting sort of complex character. Maybe that's the nicest way I can put it. But, what does everybody sort of make of him this season as we learn more and more about who he is off the field these days?
I don't think there's exactly one bucket that all of the fans would fall into. Maybe if you go back 5 years, more or less everybody in that fan base was on the same page about Aaron Rodgers. That obviously is not the case now. And it's not even just for one reason. It's the reaction after the end of that 2020 season, what happened the following offseason when he not so quietly, behind closed doors, asked for a trade. That didn't happen, obviously. And, everything that happened last year with the vaccination status comment or, diversion, one might say, all of those things have created a lot of different thoughts about Aaron Rodgers. And depending on who you talk to, you could get totally different views. There are certainly people who absolutely have bought into this version of him, this sort of crazy uncle, for lack of a better way of putting it. There are definitely people who are frustrated, not just because of the way that he misled the public with some of his comments about vaccination, but also just because, he used to be fairly quiet about non-football things. Now he's not anymore. And there are certain segments of fans of any team or of any sport that don't care for those topics to bleed into their sports coverage. So I think it would be a mistake to say that there's one group thought about him. There are a lot of them, but that in itself is a comment, right? Like, this was not a very polarizing figure among Packers fans less than half a decade ago. And now, I'm not saying that he's as polarizing as, let's say, Brett Favre is at the moment, but he is someone that engenders a lot of different thoughts now. That just wasn't the case recently.
Fascinating insight from you, Jason B. Hirschhorn. Thank you so much for joining us once again and kind of updating us on everything that's going on with the Packers. What's coming up on The Leap? Tell people where they can sort of get that, and Packers fans that are watching, where they can find you.
Yes, you can find my work covering the Packers at theleap.substack.com. It is a Packers newsletter. It comes out Monday through Friday during the season. We don't just dive into what happened on the field. We know that the fans have already seen that. We tell you what happened, or we tell you why what happened. We tell you a lot of other information that we're able to get from our reporting, just like we did recently with the Corey Davis report. So if you want to know more about the Packers and just what you see on Sundays and game days, this is a great place for you to start.
All right, we'll do, and we will certainly find that and continue to stay up to date with everything that's going on in Green Bay. Fascinating game coming up this Sunday. So look forward to talking to you again soon. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me back.